Доброго дня! Вітаємо до Українського інституту Америки з програмою «Книги в інституті». Для наших англомовних глядачів ми переведемо цю програму англійською мовою. Дуже дякую. Hello and welcome to the Books at the Institute at the Ukrainian Institute of America in New York. My name is Andrew Horodysky. I'm a member of the Ukrainian Institute of America and have had the good fortune of working alongside Dr. Walter Hoydish, chair of the Programs Committee, and Executive Director Olena Sidlovich on projects related to art at the Institute and recently books at the Institute. They continuously prove to be leaders who set a fine institutional example for our member and public constituency, make for close collaborators, and embrace a warm friendship. Thank you to both. Olena is coordinating the technical aspects of today's Zoom event. Books at the Institute is a recent initiative born out of our broader programming, enabling the public to engage with fiction and nonfiction writers presenting innovative ideas and published works on relevant topics addressing Ukraine and Ukrainian literary culture, art and society, historical and philosophical thought, and journalism. We are very excited to welcome today's special guest, best-selling Ukrainian-American novelist and short story writer, Irene Zabytko. During this virtual Zoom presentation, I encourage you to record any questions and comments you may have in the questions and comments panel on this platform for Ms. Zabytko about her works and writing. I'm sure stimulating discussion will ensue to everyone's benefit. In lieu of the opportunity to purchasing books and their signing, we will be asking for donations online throughout to support the Ukrainian Institute's volunteer-led cultural and educational programming and the further enjoyment of its unique events by our friends and community along New York's Museum Mile. Irene Zabytko is the author of The Sky Unwashed, a novel about Chernobyl and the evacuees who returned to their irradiated villages. It was a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers book, a Book Sense 76 pick selection, and a New England Bestsellers Association Discovery title. The ebook version was rated #1 on Amazon.com and appeared on the New York Times bestseller ebooks list. She is also the author of the short story collection When Luba Leaves Home, which is based on the Ukrainian community in Chicago. One of the stories, Obligation, won the Penn Syndicated Fiction Award and was read on National Public Radio's The Sound of Writing. It was selected as the New York City Public Library's Best Books for Teen Age 2004. She was awarded a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award in Ukraine, where she researched and explored the Ukrainian-based haunts of the 19th century writer Nikolai Gogol, for an upcoming novel. The essential property of the written word is that it is the fusion of intellect and emotion into a single reality, whether that be verse, fictional, or non-fictional prose. Intellect, as an isolated consideration with an unrelated concern for the interaction of our senses, represents a brittle human state. As an active reader, I experience this each time I pick up a book. The weight of too much thought has a way of disturbing not only the balance of the individual, but any concurrent objectification. I do not think that it is a question of our frustration in terms of the so-called absolutes, but rather what is important is the degree of significance in the writer's point of departure. I would think that that degree is the condition of time past, present, and future. It is also the human condition of all of us. What is it that we understand of our cultural ethnicity is not a question of original idea, but of discovery. Understanding exists, yes, but it must be found. Once recognized, and always in these terms of degree, its primary characteristics can be recorded. I would argue that the generative property inherent within interacting moments of understanding is the imaginative literature of the mind. The affirmation of imaginative association is the expression of art, both written and visual. Therefore, literature and art is an expression of knowledge. Irene Zabytko's work is not casual, but designed and meticulous. Well, what is it up to? The quality of contradictory perception runs through the author's first novel, The Sky Unwashed, and continues more richly in the story collection When Luba Leaves Home, and returns with the colorful The Days of Miracle and Wonder. From the start, however, Zabytko gives us not just the oddly withheld promise of a message, but a thunderous excess of signification, marks, images, and emotional intelligence in which the descriptive messages are multiple: disturbing, menacing, humorous, depressing, absurd, and hopeful, saturated with latent connections that sketch out an enormous field of meaning and humane understanding. Strategic written juxtaposition is an invitation to judgment, and the launching of Ms. Zabytko's understanding positions before us the incipient forces of a culture struggling to decide what it is, looking to a toxic future and caricature of the past, a culture where judgment takes the form only by way of explication to whatever level of detail one has the patience to endure. But make no mistake, it's no sin to admit not getting it the first time around. It is a written medium for the mind and the spirit through which this astute writer feels and thinks in a focused, precise way that is ordinarily lost to us on the sheer speed and fluidity of the days and weeks' events. I venture to say that because we are so marvelously made for sight, the mental visual context for Ms. Zabytko's writing is irreplaceable because it slows us down, looking for the after image in the most literal way. It presupposes us to attend with a little more humanity and a little bit more intelligence to what is right before us on the page. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Irene Zabytko. Irene, it's so nice to see you finally, albeit on a computer screen, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start off by congratulating you on the recent publication of your latest collection of short stories, The Days of Miracle and Wonder. A good place for us to start off today. It's comprised of a cast of colorful characters from different walks of Ukrainian society and life. The title for the collection was culled from Paul Simon's song, The Boy in the Bubble. Can you talk a little bit about how this title came to be chosen?
Well, first, Andrei, it's really nice to see you. We've had several phone conversations, but it's always good to see you in person, well, virtually, and hopefully in person someday. First of all, thank you, Books at the Institute and the Ukrainian Institute of America for inviting me. And this is such an honor and such a privilege, and I'm so grateful. And hopefully someday we will be in person. And thank you to all who are out there. I can't see you. But again, I'm grateful of your presence. I can feel your presence even so. And even if you're watching this later, thank you. So the idea was actually, I just wanted to have a collection of short stories. I like interlocking themes, you know, which is what I did with my first collection, When Luba Leaves Home. You know, there's one protagonist throughout several stories. What I wanted to do this time around was to write something based similar to Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, you know, where people were traveling to a site in Ukraine in post-Soviet times, which was a very, very difficult time. I was there at that time teaching English. I was one of the first Americans to come over to teach English in Kyiv. And I was witnessed to many of the struggles Ukrainian people were having, you know, post-Soviet struggles, and they were not prepared for this. I mean, they wanted democracy and liberty, independence, but economically they were not ready for this. So a lot of the times they were having a hard, very, very hard issue. So anyway, I wanted to write about that. I thought it was important, an important time in Ukrainian history as well. So I wanted to link it through some stories in the way, stories within stories. And so the initial idea was to have people going together on a trip, the bus breaks down that they're on, and they're telling stories to each other while they're waiting for repairs. Very much like Chaucer's sort of. Canterbury Tales, if you've read that. But I didn't get around to finishing this, so I just did what I could with what I've written over the years. And during the pandemic, I was very ill, and I'm thinking, I'm going to die. I think we all had this thought one time or another during this horrible year. And I wanted these stories to go out. So I used one of the titles from one of the stories. And I just made that the story of the collection as opposed to something else. And that's where the title comes from. I love Paul Simon. I love that particular song. And I just felt the title was apt.
Well, we talked about the Chaucerian characters. They come alive from various offbeat and at times absurdist circumstances. Can you talk about that? Because they're not like the normal people that we would run into in the street. I mean, these are selected individuals that have various quirks, various troubles because of their own station in life. So can you talk about where they come from?
Well, a mixture, as with any fiction writer, a mixture of life experiences and people I've grown up with, and their quirks and their uniqueness, and the people I met in Ukraine as well. I mean, this is all conglomeration. I don't really have a set. It's an interesting process, writing fiction in particular, and many people have experienced this who do write fiction, from what I'm told, including myself. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. It tends to come out in the process of the writing. So when people show up on the page, characters, sometimes they're planned, and maybe I try to plan them out. Oh, I like that person, I'm going to write about him or her. It doesn't work that way in the actual writing process. So I'm going to embellish them with certain characteristics that are going to be integral to the story. And the story also has a lot to do with who these people are in terms of forming them into the story and what they're doing in the story. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, because it doesn't make sense to me half the time.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I hear very often about writers having plans for a certain character or character development, and somehow along the way, either that moves forward in that direction, or it makes a U-turn and becomes something completely different. And it works in the process and usually not in the planning stages. So thank you.
Yeah, I can give you. I'm sorry, I could give you an example. So when I was writing the first story, which is Elvis has left the country, and this is the narrator. The narrator is a KGB agent, and I was going to make him, despicable, a really bad guy. But in the writing of it, he is admitting to himself that his soul is polluted, and he hates doing what he's doing, denouncing the people that he's denouncing. This was a total surprise to me. Why am I making him a humane person? This person that I initially thought I'm going to hate as a character and as a person too. But once I started writing him and realizing that he also has his guilt and his feelings towards the people that he is putting away into the gulag virtually or whatever, I didn't expect that to happen. And yet that's how the character wanted to be set on the page. I had really nothing much to do with that beyond writing it physically.
What happens is that in short story, especially, these developments have to occur very, very quickly, typically within the first couple of paragraphs. How does your approach to short story writing differ to your approach to long form? And what are the different challenges that you face with each? Obviously, for short story, you have a lot to cover from the first to last page. And with a novel, obviously, there's more space, whether it's space of time or physical space to really kind of work those things out. So can you kind of give us kind of some examples of what you go through in terms of those kind of approaches?
Yeah, well, short stories, you're right. You have to be more compact. You have to get to the point of the story much quicker than you would in a novel. A novel's more expansive. You can introduce a lot more characters. You can get into the heads of these characters more like Dickens does. he gets into everybody's heads, you know, even the minor characters, you know, the little cameo appearances, they will get into their heads or psyches. And that's great. And you can usually spend many years writing a novel. A short story, sometimes you spend as long as well. The form has its own uniqueness. Sometimes I start out writing a short story, but it turns into a novel. The Sky Unwashed was originally a short story. And I realized, you know, this is not working. I need to have more people here. There's more going on here. It's not enough. And sometimes it organically grows into more than just, you know, the short form. And again, this is the mysterious creative process that writers have. And then sometimes a novel doesn't work. It's too long. It's too boring. The characters don't do much. They don't have much to do with one another. There's no point to it. And then you can edit it down to a short story, and then it works, you know, the opposite. You know, and some people really don't like to write novels. They much prefer short stories, and that's their focus initially, and that's all they're going to do. And also the same with novelists. For me, it could go either way. You know, it could go either way. And like I said, with The Sky Unwashed was like, you know, 10 pages initially, and I thought that was the end. But I realized, no, there's more here, and I wanted more. And then another character showed up on the page, and I didn't expect her to show up. She was the healer. I had no idea why she showed up, and I thought, oh, I have to do more with her now. Again, it's very organic and strange, and I don't have a real answer for that.
Do you find
that's my process?
Do you find yourself doing the same kind of research for both short story collections? Well, not collections, but say you have an idea of one story or a few stories. Do you do the same kind of research you would do for a novel, or is it just something that's completely different in terms of approach?
Yeah, research is tricky for me as a fiction writer. It's tricky. I mean, I can have an idea of the time, the setting, the place I want to write about, and where my characters are going to live, in what era. But for me, it's the story. But what is the story here? And okay, and then if I have to go back, like writing right now, I'm still writing my novel about Nikolai Gogol. Right. And I didn't know a lot about his time period, about, you know, Tsarist Russia, or that time, the Russian Empire, which included Ukraine. And I had to go back and search all these people that he mentions and knew in his time, and also the whole idea of Tsarist Russia. But the research came after the stories. The story for me is always the first part. So I can have a story about Chernobyl. Okay, I know a little bit about Chernobyl. Of course, it's in the news. I know about it. But what about it? What are the characters doing there? For me, that's the story. Then I can go back and I can get all the dates and whatever, you know, whatever's necessary for the factual parts of the story.
To fill in
as needed. And sometimes I embellish those too. And that's one of the perks of being a fiction writer. It's not too outrageous, though.
Well, we had talked a little bit on the phone about your gracing us with a little reading from one of your stories. What do you have planned for us today?
Okay. Well, if I could show my book, The Days of Miracle and Wonder, and because Andrei, you were so kind to invite me, and you did say you liked one of my stories in particular. I'll read from that. And so, first of all, I want to preface this. So I wrote 2 stories about the devil, and I found that great. It was great fun to do. There are many, many great fiction stories about the devil. And, well, of course, you know, Faust by Goethe, and then there's C.S. Lewis's The Screw Tape Letters, brilliant. And then for me, growing up as a kid, it was the Devil and Daniel Webster by Stephen Vincent Benet. I don't know if anybody's reading that anymore, but I thought it was, like, as a 12-year-old kid, for the first time as a Catholic girl, thinking, oh, can you write about the devil? Can I read a story about the devil like this? It was such a revelation for me. So I have a great fondness for devil stories in fiction. So this was a great chance for me to write one of my own. So this one is called The Speculator's Tale, and there's an argument. Again, people are on a bus, the bus breaks down, and there's an argument between 2 characters, the speculator and the customs official. And they're both pretty much the same kind of guy in Soviet times and post-Soviet times.
I call them Heckle and Jekyll.
Heckle and Jekyll, right? Exactly. Anyway, so they're telling each other stories, and both are accusing the other of really being the devil. Anyway, so the first double story is the one that the customs official has against the speculator. But anyway, you have to read it to really get the full background here. And it's a story within a story. And this is about Lucifer, who is in Ukraine, of course, and has a lot of businesses in Ukraine, a lot of businesses. And he has many lackeys who work for him, one being a guy called Smirkachi. And Smirkachi is called so because he has a lot of discharge coming out of his nose all the time. He's a big guy, he's a lackey, he does a lot of things for Lucifer. He's kind of stupid, too. He doesn't really know who Lucifer, he kind of knows who Lucifer is, but, he's his boss, what are you going to do? Smirkachi works in a kiosk. And if you've been to Ukraine, you've seen these kiosks on every corner and most of the towns everywhere. And they sell everything in these places. They sell bubble gum, they sell nylons, they sell cigarettes, And during post-Soviet times in particular, these were the go-to stores that people went to. And they're still around in Kiev especially and in other towns in Ukraine. Anyway, so Smirkachi runs a kiosk, but he also does a lot of other things for Lucifer, side jobs. So anyway, Lucifer has another job for him that he wants to talk to Smirkachi about. So he brings him out to a bar and they have a drink and this is their conversation. So I'll read a little bit from that conversation. Smirkachi was indeed a loyal employee and did his job well. So well that as a reward, the boss would sometimes take him out for a drink at one of the shadier, more beguiling bars around town, membership only. There, Smirkachi and Lucifer would sit until mid-morning, until Smirkachi told the evil one he had to run to the kiosk and open up for the day's business, no matter how addle-headed and hungover he felt. Lucifer approved. My boy, your work ethic is so refreshing, he said. Too many of our people were spoiled by communism. Nobody busted their humps to work. Who would fire them in the workers' paradise? In those days, all those bad bullshies would sit in their little offices or behind counters in stores, never lifting a baby finger or help anyone. Bad service, wouldn't you agree? He poured another round of the exquisite bottle of imported French cognac Smirkachi had developed a taste for. Capitalism is damn hard work, Smirkachi agreed. Yes, very hard, Lucifer said. Our people are so surprised when they travel to the West and find that they actually have to, oh dear, work. And they both laughed at that one. But that is what makes the Americans so rich, said the speculator devil. They work so much, sometimes as much as 80 hours a week. Can you believe it? They dream work, breathe it, thrive on it, survive on it, die on it. You know why, my friend? Because they think that money will satisfy all their whims and dreams. They'll buy anything that will make them happy. Cars, jewelry, lovers. He poured another glass for his listener and motioned for him to drink up, drink up. They'll even spend thousands of dollars for children. True. Smirkachi had to think about that for a bit, which was hard given the fine cognac surrounding his tonsils and warming his chest. Children? He pondered. He thought it very peculiar. I never heard of such a thing. They can't find time to have children. What a strange country. Well, they want to adopt. Many there can't naturally have children for all sorts of reasons, Lucifer said. He produced another bottle on the table, poured the new bottle, and as usual, didn't drink it himself. Actually, I feel sorry for them. I myself don't have the time, but no, I must. I will help them. Yes, I will. How? Smirkachi asked, besotted and sodded. I'll start another business, an adoption agency. Think of it. We have so many beautiful and healthy children who, alas, my heart bleeds for them too, have so little from their own poor, neglectful parents. I can't stand it. Nay, I won't stand for it. Smirkachi, don't stop me. No, of course I wouldn't, he said. He knew about neglectful parents since he was a graduate of orphanages himself. You are such a generous soul, Lucifer Luceveyovich. I can't say that, Luceveyovich. Oh, not at all, said the devil. So you'll help me? You'll help our children to find good, rich homes? With pleasure, Smerkachi said, and he meant it, as drunk as he was. He felt his oath to be more sacred and truer, especially since the tentacles of the good cognac had wrapped around his head. He had an urge to kiss Lucifer, but decided against it. No cognac was that good. Excellent, my boy. And this business venture will be worth your while, I promise, he said. They clinked glasses. Lucifer's was empty, but no one noticed. As it happened, the general's generosity also extended to many doctors at a certain hospital in town who would no doubt be very eager to participate in helping the orphans too. Surely the Hippocratic oath must somewhere include the placement of orphans. So we take the kids from the orphanages? Smerkachi asked. No, not from the orphanages, Lucifer said, a bit irritated. The kids are usually too old. Americans want tiny newborns who will learn how to cry and gurgle in English. Oh, then we wait for a baby to show up at the orphanage, Smerkachi said, trying to be helpful for such a worthy cause. No, idiot. Why do I talk to you? Lucifer snapped. Forget the damn orphanages. They're useless. Listen, we take the kids straight after they are born. In the hospital, dummy. What the hell? Smerkachi said, not fully understanding things. It's all perfectly legal and normal. The new mothers sign a document the doctors prepare ahead of time, giving away all their rights to the brat. This way, the Americans will feel better about taking them home with them, Lucifer said. He sighed. Oh, they're such a litigious group. Oh, well, as long as we have documents, Smerkachi said. He sometimes missed the Soviet days of cumbersome Byzantine documents and edicts and ukazes for everything from getting a new apartment to having a tooth extracted. So, what do I do? Babysit or something until the Americans come? Lucifer was an ugly bastard when he laughed. My dear boy, you are so funny, so funny. No, all you do, and you do it so well, is to make sure everyone cooperates. You simply stand there at all of your massive height and weight. Stand by the doctor when he gives the mother the papers to sign. If she causes trouble, you know what to do. And always remember this above all, added Lucifer, his dark, pupilless eyes brimming with tears. We're doing this for the children.
A farce, but a brilliant farce. These are things that actually occur in Ukraine. I found it fascinating that you were able to expand how time and place becomes much lengthier within a snippet of time. For example, it's like a snapshot, almost like a notation passing, that you're able to call this entire conversation that takes place over a period of time for us to read, but it's a very short period actually. And what's interesting is that this contract with the devil that the Smerkachi makes, it turns up on him when he and his wife end up in the hospital as well. But we won't spoil that. So regarding some of the other stories in the collection, is there a method of sequencing the stories in any particular order? For example, the Elvis story starts in the beginning, and then the artist and AIDS story at the end. It's actually titled the Days of Miracle and Wonder. And do you have an idea of which goes which? Kind of like in this kind of Chaucerian almost kind of parade of characters? And if so, how does that affect our understanding of the narrative at large and their individual narratives?
Well, first of all, there are more stories that I wrote that are not included in this collection. Maybe someday, maybe it'll be totally a new book another time. I don't know. But for these particular stories, I tried to, I didn't have a conscious way of placing them until I decided which stories, first of all, I was going to include. And then I decided on the time period. So the Elvis story takes place like in the 50s.
Right.
And then the Elvis story, the Days of Miracle and Wonder, which is about an artist whose friends have AIDS, and he keeps painting so that he tries to save them by painting, and somehow they become better when he paints. And when he stops painting, they all get sick again. So he thinks he has something to do with their being well. So he continues painting in a frenzy. At any rate, that's like in the 80s. So when I was actually piecing the collection together, I did have a more conscious effort with time. But not really. I mean, it's sort of ambivalent too, in the middle anyway, I think. I don't know.
Okay. Growing up, what is your first memory of literature? This could be poetry, prose, stories, whether read aloud by your parents or yourself. And is there a tradition, particularly in fiction, that influenced and continues to influence your own writing?
Mm-hmm. Well, you can always tell the writers as children, because they're the ones reading all the time. They're always reading. They don't want to play outside. They want to read, pretty much. So I read everything. I was a voracious reader as a kid, and I was so thrilled when I got my library card. You know, I grew up in Chicago, so when my brother took me to the Chicago Library downtown, Chicago Public Library, which was a grand building. It's now a different one. But when I was growing up, it was this beautiful building on Michigan Avenue. It's still there. It's something else. It's a cultural center now. But at the time when I was growing up, it was this beautiful building, and getting away from my neighborhood, which was kind of dangerous at the time, and going to this magnificent palace of a place, and having free books at my disposal. I mean, wow, this was incredible. And so I read whatever I could. I used to go there often. And then there was a neighborhood library I used to go to a lot. And I read whatever I could. And of course, I read the Nancy Drew books growing up, and then became more sophisticated with other kinds of books. But I think the first connection to me as a writer, or thinking I could write someday, was, I think, when was I, like 13, 14 in high school, probably a freshman in high school. And we were given J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. And I thought, wow, is this the first time I read something that, I know he wrote this in the 30s, of course, you know, but even so, it was something that spoke to me deliberately. And I thought, wow, I didn't know that people can write like this. And it just touched me on a deeper level. And I think Salinger's book was such an opening, a portal for so many writers who thought literature had to be stilted or Dickensian or something that I was used to reading during that time. But when I read Salinger, wow, you know, that was incredible. So that was one revelation. The second revelation was when, again, the Chicago Public Library. I was a little bit older, and they used to have these book sales, books that they were no longer keeping at the library. So I bought a biography for $1. It's a beautiful old book by Edna Ferber. And she wrote a biography called, an autobiography, A Peculiar Treasure. And I don't know if people are reading Edna Ferber anymore. She wrote Showboat, So Big. She was a Pulitzer Prize winner. You know, she was this great writer that I think is a little bit out of fashion now, but at any rate. And I read about her and the fact that she was a writer, a woman writer. And living in New York and having these adventures with people at the Algonquin table and the round table and these kinds of things that I've heard about. And I thought, for the first time, I thought, oh, a woman could be a writer. Oh, wow, how about that? Little kernels of things like that. But I read so many different kinds of things, science fiction and mysteries and literary literature, and settled on literary literature, I think.
We used to buy boxes of those books in the library. I mean, we were they were like 5 cents, 10 cents, and they were beautiful. Yeah. They were beautiful volumes. So
yes,
it was a very nice early experience. What excites you these days about literature? Are there any particular thinkers, writers, anybody that really connects with you?
Yeah, I read like 5 or 6 books at a time. You know, I have a Kindle now, which is not good for my eyes, really, but I try to do that. Yeah, there are many books that I'm reading right now at the same time. I'm some books I've missed when they first came out, so I'm reading Ragtime by Dr. O, which came out I think in the 70s, 80s, you know, and I'm reading it now, and because
like mid 80s, I think.
80s. And so that's on my Kindle, and a book by Amy Tan, and I'm reading. I have many books that I've yet to read. I have a big list of books still, which I think I'm going to do this summer. But for the doctoral book, I found it interesting because I'm always interested in how writers can use history or historical figures into fiction. Because I'm writing Nikolai Gogol story in my interpretation of him in my book, I'm just curious how other writers are able to use real historical characters, you know, for their stories, and still it's fiction, and yet, you know, maybe it's not so fictional. So I find that fascinating with this particular book, Ragtime. It's brilliantly written, of course, and he brings in so many different people and different time elements, and I just find that fascinating. So I'm studying it more than I'm enjoying it as a reader, and sometimes it's a little dangerous to do.
Well, then you just go back, you study it, and then you go back and enjoy it another time. That's very, very often. That's the whole kind of discipline of reading allows you to do that. That you can read and reread certain works, and you read them on different levels, whether it's, you know, in a more kind of disciplinary way, or just for sheer enjoyment, or, you know, the enjoyment of the word. So.
Well, sometimes it's the other way around too. Sometimes I enjoy something so much, I'm thinking, how did this person do this? And then I'll go back and study, you know, how did they do this? And deconstruct the sentences and figure it out. Yeah, if I can. Sometimes I can't, but yeah.
I
think it's what a lot. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is what a lot of writers do with people they admire. So, for me, I love Nabokov. I just love Nabokov. I know people criticize him all the time, but he didn't like Ukrainians, by the way, from what I'm gathering. But that's okay, you know, it's fine. So sometimes I will parse what he does, and because of his usage of language. Not that I want to write like him, but he is influential, and he elevates. I think the other thing about reading people that you admire is to elevate and challenge what you can do. And that's what he does for me, you know, even though he doesn't like Ukrainians, but it's okay. I forgive him.
Nonetheless, but he challenges you as a writer and a reader. So when you cull and parse stylistic elements of his writing, and then you work upon that, and so for example, if you wanted to not really appropriate it, but you're borrowing certain conventions and then placing it into your own thought or thinking, and you see if it works or doesn't work. If it works, it's a writer that connects with you. Basically, you have a similar vernacular and a similar language. It's almost kind of like a dialogue. So it works that way.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Last month marked the 35th anniversary of the tragic Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster. Your first novel, The Sky Unwashed, which we learned started off as a short story today, is about one village's inhabitants near Pripyat and the main protagonist's heroic and deep sense of longing for home. It was written when the wounds of this catastrophe were still fresh. Do you think, and how does this story resonate to you? I don't know if you recently reread it, if you go back to reread your own works, but I'm kind of curious to see how your own attitude might have changed from that time period, and then how does it sit today?
Well, personally, for my own book, Chernobyl still resonates for me, you know, as a catastrophe, as an ecological catastrophe, an economic catastrophe, a political catastrophe, a big failure, a world failure, and it's still being, you know, it's still dangerous there. And in fact, I was reading stories about how there are all sorts of people still getting sick from there, and it's just, you know, it's just a terrible thing that people are not always aware of. Maybe around Chernobyl anniversary time, maybe. certainly in Ukraine. People are still suffering there. The book, but the Sky Unwashed, when I read it again, I don't recognize it. It's like somebody else wrote it. I was much younger when I wrote it. I mean, it still resonates with me. I think it's still well done. I would have done things differently now if I had to write it today, of course. But this is the thing about writing, and maybe with artists as well, visual artists and other people who work in the arts, create. Once it's done, and it's out in the world, and people accept it in the ways that they do, whether they like it or they don't like it or whatever, it impacts them or not. And when I go back to an old work, especially in a time in my life which many, many years ago, it's like someone else wrote it. Like, okay, but maybe I can appreciate it on another level now. I'm not sure that answers your question, but
fully, because I'm always interested to see how certain events have impacted a writer, okay, and how, say, for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades later, what they think about it at that point. Sometimes they go on to write not necessarily a sequel, but maybe some sort of continuation on that theme or the character. So I want to know if any of those characters still are alive in you, or it's just a work that was completed at a certain point in your writing career and it's basically over with, because it's a very, very dynamic subject, and the issues surrounding it are very much alive today. So it'd be interesting to see how those relationships carry over 35 years later. Well, not quite,
Right. Well, sometimes I think about going back to Zosya's story. If you remember at the end, she was the daughter-in-law of the protagonist. Yes. And she was able to escape with her children. She didn't go back to the irradiated village like the mother-in-law, Marusha, did. So, of course, the elder people die at the end. I hate to say it, but they do. But she goes off with her children to another place. And it would be interesting to follow her story. And I've toyed with the idea of maybe going back to her. And I might do that. Right now, Gogol is my kind of, it's my obsession, and it's like being married to somebody. Like, oh wow, I love him and I don't love him, and so I'm struggling with him, and I want to finish Gogol because it's what I'm doing right now. And in my head is a 19th century, Russian Empire.
Sure.
I'm in a whole other place and time as well.
I mentioned to you that earlier that my reading group has even hit the Gogol's name has come up a few times here and there. Yeah. So maybe we're going to revisit one of his writings very soon.
Yes,
we'll see.
You should. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, while we're on the topic of reading, did you wish to read something from Sky Unwashed, perhaps?
Sure, if you want me to.
If there's an excerpt that you can flavor us with.
Yeah. Again, it's been a long time since I've read it, so this will be kind of new to me again. I'll read the prologue, which is the introduction. Kind of sets the stage for everything. The pastoral life. Yeah. Okay. And I'll just read. I'm going to read all of it, read most of it, though. Okay. In the village of Stary Lis, during the less politically oppressive days of the Gorbachev era in the Soviet Union, the citizens working on the kolhosp, the collective farm, felt themselves to be more prosperous than their counterparts in the cities of Ukraine. The cow's milk was sweet and creamy because the animals were allowed to roam the fertile grasslands. From a distance, fleshy black cows dotted the crisp hay fields where they ate the tender and abundant lemongrass and clover. Near the fields, wild red-orange poppies grew defiantly between the giant stalks of sunflowers. Old men chewed tobacco and sunflower seeds during harvest time so as not to set fire to the dry, igloo-shaped bundles of hay with their homemade cigarettes, while the strong, overworked women tended the cows and ran the tractors alongside their men. When they weren't too busy with the farm work, the women still made traditional jam from Queen Anne's lace, a golden paste they spread on generous slices of soft brown breads, often baked in the huge outdoor clay ovens their ancestors had fired for over 100 years. But the old farmers' children weren't so stubborn. They preferred to seek the better wages at the nuclear power plant in nearby Chernobyl. There, the gray cement modern buildings were a monument to the Soviet promise of progress. Everyone knew that if you could last 5 years doing whatever work they gave you, you were eligible to apply for a short family vacation at the plant's residence in the resort town of Sochi on the Black Sea. 10 years on the job got you a booklet of coupons that permitted you to shop at the Kashtan, the stores that were only for tourists with hard currency or for Communist Party officials. At the Kashtan, you could buy transistor radios and mock Oriental rugs. Sometimes sexy ivory nylon blouses from East Germany or ice pink lipsticks from Poland would come in unexpectedly and be brought up in minutes before the next surprise product appeared without warning on the shelves. What the younger villagers study least wanted most was to bring some material comfort into their hard, barren lives. Years of empty communist promises had led to apathy and disillusionment and made them hunger for the tangible possessions they thought would soothe their frustrated spirits. For their part, the older generation, the ones who had survived Stalin, famine, and war, especially the babushi, the old women and babushkas who kept the old ways alive with their icons and litanies despite the official ban on religion, knew that the hard times never end. In 1986, Paraskevia Volodymyryevna told the other babushi of Stary Lis that the storks had not returned to nest on her thatched roof. This had happened only twice before during her lifetime. In 1933, at the height of Stalin's artificial famine, and in 1944, when the Germans invaded the village. A bad sign. Paraskevia would tell anyone passing her house who would listen. Maybe they'll come yet, many said to appease the old woman, but Paraskevia shook her head. The storks had always returned just when the long, thick icicles under the eaves melted and dripped like a death knell to announce the end of winter. By the time the first crocuses opened their sassy yellow petals and the buds on the naked trees were about to green and swell, the storks should already have been settled into their wide nests. A bad sign, Paraskevia repeated to herself. She made the sign of the cross and expected something to happen.
Your follow-up publishing project to that was the story collection When Luba Leaves Home, about the emigre experience in and around your hometown, Chicago. It's a long way from Chernobyl. Is it autobiographical in any sense? I know it's kind of like a cliched thing to ask a lot of writers, and there's usually some truth in that, but I'm just kind of wondering where that stands with you. And did it have beginnings in your mind or on paper before the Sky Unwashed, or because it wasn't published that far after? So I was wondering if these were stories already brewing within you, and the Sky Unwashed came in the middle of that. I like kind of interested in knowing how that worked out for you.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, the immigrant experience, well, yeah, I grew up in Chicago in the Ukrainian neighborhood, which is called Ukrainian Village at the time. When I was growing up, it wasn't Ukrainian Village. It was the Ukrainian ghetto, is what we called it, because it was not the best of neighborhoods. Now it's a very, very expensive, elite, chic neighborhood. And that's great. That's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's still, the churches are still there. The school was there that I went to, and things like a wonderful community. Okay, but yeah, you know, you're right. The stories came first before the Sky Unwashed. And I wrote this as a student in the creative writing. I was an MFA student at Vermont College in the creative writing program. And that's where the stories came together. And interesting, because when I first started out as an MFA student, learning how to write, I didn't write about Ukrainians at all. I wanted to be, like John Updike or John Cheever. And I didn't want, the Ukrainian thing, why am I writing about that? But those stories were so bad and so false. And then when I started to write about Ukrainians, and what do you know best? I knew my neighborhood best. This is where I grew up. And I'm not Luba. Luba was, we call the DP, the peace, a displaced person, right? No, I was born in Chicago. My father's American born. My mother came before the war. So we didn't have that experience that Luba and her parents did. But I knew so many people, grew up amongst them, and they influenced me and who I became as a person and as a writer. And these stories started coming in, and that collection was my MFA thesis, which I, of course, revised and brought into publication. But I wanted to, but I wasn't getting anywhere with that, so I wrote the novel because Chernobyl at the time was more prescient and more important. And it started as a short story, as I mentioned, and then it grew into this novel, which eventually became the first published book. And then Luba came right after, because my editor said, "You've got anything else?" Oh yeah, by the way, I do. So there it is. But you're right. The stories came, and the writing isn't, I don't think it's as strong, really, because it was such an early work. But that was another time and place and era for me as a writer.
Every month and year, it seems, to me at least, there are countless writers who publish distilled life experiences at home and in their native lands and abroad. They write about their respective cultures, inform and define who they are as humans first, then as writers. Considering the rich array of literature available to us today by multi-ethnic international writers in English, why do you think there are so few, a handful actually, of writers of Ukrainian descent in the diaspora writing in English? What in our culture prevented a nurturing and growth of the writing discipline on the national stage? And then also, there's like a second part question, I guess, to that. And how can that, how can that culture change, and can it? It's a loaded topic. I think it's an important one, and I think you're a central figure that would have very good insight into that.
Well, I have to say I'm more optimistic about Ukrainian Americans anyway, writing more now than they used to. And because there are more opportunities, there's the internet, there's zines, blogs, there are just more opportunities and more ways to be published and known in the world. Whether they choose to write about being Ukrainian or any connection to Ukraine, that's a whole other issue, But I think, I struggle with this. In my MFA program, I may have been one of two people who were Ukrainian descent and writing about Ukrainians at all. We just don't encourage. It's so ironic to me because, our national hero is Shevchenko, a poet, right? Why don't we encourage more people to be writers? No. In fact, when I was growing up, my father said, be a doctor. In fact, I started out to be a pre-med student and failed badly at it. But this was the direction that I was programmed growing up. And the people who were also my peers and their parents also, they were programmed, and maybe that's not a bad thing. To be successful in this country, you should be a lawyer, a doctor, professional. Writers, well, it's a nice hobby, good luck, but to have, and visual artists as well, or even composers, it's really, really tough in the arts. One of the problems that I find is that, yes, okay, we may have very good writers, but this is true of anybody, of any ethnicity. If there aren't people who are open to what you're writing about, and these are the gatekeepers, okay? And the gatekeepers are also people who are really big into marketing. So like I say, Chernobyl, yeah, people will buy my books in April. Because of Chernobyl, they have the consciousness of Chernobyl, but to keep that ongoing in people's consciousness so that they want to know more about it and will read. And here's the other thing. People don't read fiction as much as they used to. This is the other thing. We don't read normally as much as we did before the internet. I really think the internet is killing us on several levels. So that's a whole other discussion. Gatekeepers. Yeah, we need more. Yes, we need more Ukrainian American writers, Ukrainian writers, certainly, but we also need people who are publishers. We also need, and not just Ukrainian presses, we need mainstream presses. We need people that are able to get us into the New Yorker, or places that are really a powerhouse where we are visible, not only to just Ukrainians, but beyond, the world. This is really hard to do, to break in. We're not the flavor of the month, really, is what I'm saying. There are other groups that are, and that's great.
You don't have editors either.
Don't have editors, you have agents. You really need agents in this business. If you don't have an agent, good luck. You can self-publish, you can do that, but it's not going to get you very far. It's very difficult. Or critics either, or somebody that will just say, this, and sometimes people, do you want to be an ethnic writer either? This is something I also struggle with. Am I an ethnic writer? Am I an American writer? What am I? I don't know. Sort of a hybrid, I guess. But it's really hard because we don't have many role models, really. Which is why Gogol, I'm getting back to Gogol again, and or Hohoy, I have to say Hohoy, but Gogol, right. The world knows him as Nikolai Gogol. Why does the world know him as Nikolai Gogol? Why is he considered a Russian writer? He's not. He wrote in Russian, but he was really a Ukrainian. But I understand the mindset, even during his time. To be a successful writer, he had to go to St. Petersburg. He wasn't going to do anything in Ukraine. He tried to stay in Kiev. He couldn't be in Kiev. He had to go to St. Petersburg, where the action was in the Russian Empire, and write in Russian. But he wrote about Ukrainians, which was the fashion of the time. People were writing about Ukrainians as some sort of ethnic, exotic group, and very quaint and provincial. And Gogol, and then Gogol said, "Okay, I'm going to do that too. I'm going to try to get known here. These are my people. I know what I'm talking about better than these books that he was reading that were really not that great at the time." But anyway, if it wasn't for people like Pushkin and other people of that strata who led him into that very select group, an elitist group, we wouldn't know who Gogol was. But everybody in the world knows who he is. Anybody who reads literature appreciates Gogol, and sometimes will know he's Ukrainian. But again, you need that push from these gatekeepers, and we don't have that so much in this business anyway.
I'd like to take a turn now to the act of writing, or the discipline of writing. The novelist and the essayist Annie Dillard wrote in her book, The Writing Life, the sensation of writing a book is the sensation of spinning, blinded by love and daring. At its best, the sensation of writing is that of any unmerited grace. It is handed to you, but only if you look for it. You search, you break your back, you break your heart, your brain, and then, and only then, is it handed to you. Does this bear a familiar chord to you? How do you approach the writing discipline? And would you share some insight to your idea gathering, research, note taking, and kind of like a routine that you keep as a writer?
I love Annie Dillard. That's a great book, by the way. It's all of those things. It's first of all, it's a solitary act. We collaborate at some point, with editors and such, and with people like yourself who bring us into the public. But normally a writer is very, very solitary. It's a solitary act. It's an act of faith. You're creating something that you think people are going to want someday, without really knowing what the tastes are of the public that you're trying to reach. If you are trying, a lot of writers don't even try to reach a public. They're just writing because they have to. So it's all of those things. And as far as my process goes, I write when I can. I write every day, and otherwise I get very irritable, very angry, and not a nice person to be around. And I need to have that time alone to write. And if I don't do that, then there's something wrong. And I'm always constantly churning, and I'm taking in information, even if I'm not physically writing. I am. Here's an example. Okay, one of the Luba stories. There's a guy about to fight another guy, but before he fights, in a bar, of course, before he fights, he brings out his comb and he combs his hair. Okay, I thought that was brilliant because I was on a bus And and right when we were just about to get off, there was a guy in front of me, and he took out his comb and he just combed his hair because he was going to meet somebody. And I thought, wow, these little moments of being, these little moments that you take in without knowing that it's going to be put in a story sometime, if ever. These are just things that you're always immersing yourself in, whether you're conscious of it or not. So that happens in, again, part of the creative process, which we can do a whole hour on, you know, trying to dissect what that is. So my writing style is I have an idea of what I'm going to write about. I have some idea of a character, but nothing really happens until the actual physical act of writing. And sometimes I'll know an ending, but not the story that leads up to it, you know. But at least I can start with the ending, and I can, you know, work my way towards it, which is what happened with the Chernobyl story and then novel. It's different for every writer. It really is. Mm-hmm.
How do you know a work is finished when you're writing?
You think you do. Sometimes it's never finished. I thought my Gogol was finished, but it's not. It's just not. What I do when I think it's finished, I put it away for a while, maybe 2 months, maybe longer, and then I'll come back to it because you're so involved. And again, it's a solitary thing you're doing. And you kind of lose your perspective, and it's good to let it rest somewhere else, maybe work on something else, maybe don't work on anything, you know, do something fun, maybe, I don't know. And then come back to it and see with fresh eyes. And if you have someone you can trust, and this is the thing, because we are solitary types, it's good to have people you can share your work with. And to get their input, you know, it's good to have a writers group if you're lucky to have that, or take a class or something. If you can trust somebody, not your nearest and dearest, it has to be somebody that understands writing and what you're getting as a creative person or trying to achieve. Even if it's not the best thing you're doing, you need somebody who has a critical eye, with love, but a critical eye, and that's the best thing, really.
Do you have like a favorite?
But I put it away now.
Do you have like a favorite person that you go to, or an editor that you like to work with that understands you?
Yeah, I do. But I also, the older I get, and the more I trust my own judgment, and it's because I you know, it's evolved into that state already. And then sometimes you know, I did fight with my editor on some things with the Sky Unwashed. You know, there's some things I said no, that's not the way it should be. You know, but not everything, of course. But there are just some things I'm going to take a stand on, and yeah, and that's part of being an artist, I think.
In 2016, you were awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to travel to Ukraine to research Mykolaiii. For your new novel. Would you talk a little bit about the actual experience and perhaps talk a little bit about the work without giving too much away before publication?
Well, I've written a lot of it before I left for Ukraine. I was there about 9 months. And this is a research grant. I wasn't teaching, which gave me a lot of time to travel. For most of the time, however, I know I was in Odessa because I wanted to follow where Ho spent a lot of his time. So I stayed in Nizhyn, which is in Poltava, and I stayed at, now it's a university now, Gogol State University, which was actually the gymnasium, or the prep school, I guess, is where Gogol went as a child. The original building is still there. And it's really a beautiful building. And Nizhyn's a nice little town. And Gogol did not like it there for lots of reasons. But anyway, but it was an experience. So I was there for a while, and then I went to Kiev because Gogol spent a lot of time in Kiev, and Odessa. And unfortunately, in Odessa, I broke my foot. I didn't realize I was hopping around, literally hopping around in pain, and so it was the winter time, so I spent a lot of it sequestered at a wonderful friend's home in Kiev. But I did a lot of writing. But when the springtime came and my foot healed, my ankle healed, I went to Rome for a considerable amount of time because Gogol spent a lot of time in Rome as well, which the Fulbright enabled me to do. And but but it was fascinating to be in Ukraine, and it was because I wanted. What is very important to me is to emphasize how Ukrainian Gogol was in his writing, and in his personality, and in his legacy. And if and going back doing the research on his time period, and reading the critics of the time who hated Gogol, hated him, and they hated Dead Souls, they hated the Inspector General, they hated all of his works because, and many of them criticized that he wrote in bad Russian, and also that he put a lot of Ukrainian words into the Russian words with the Russian sentences. And in the stories. So he was always considered a Ukrainian, a provincial, somebody from the backwater. Even Pushkin used to call him a hoho, I mean, they all did. And yet it's so ironic to me that everybody thinks he's Russian, and he's really, really not. So I think what I'm trying to do is to get that Ukrainianness out, in this book. And it's easy to do. It's just the rest of his personality is so weird that I have to figure out what I'm doing with that. But it was a good experience, and I hope to go back after the pandemic and to revisit some. I haven't been to the Sotochinsy fair. I'm told that I left Ukraine before that happened. I think it's in August usually, and I'm told, yeah, you should go once in your lifetime. It's kind of a marketplace. Yeah, have you been there? I've never been there.
No, not that.
No, I have been to his house, and it's a museum. You can go there, and it was. That was the best experience for me, and I had a wonderful guide, and you can see his clothes and his watch fob that he said Pushkin gave him. I mean, things like that, and where he lived. And it's not the biggest house; it's an estate kind of house. And his parents weren't rich, but they were part of the gentry, and you get to get a feel of that whole Ukrainian middle class world. Which I loved. And he loved his house, but he also couldn't stand being there because it was a little bit too provincial for him. So he had to go back to St. Petersburg or Rome or Odessa. He loved Odessa to get that, shot. It's when you have to go to New York for culture, and then you go back to your little world. This is my thing. Go to New York for culture, Chicago, then I come back to where I live here. That's right. And when it gets too much, you go back to a quieter place. But yeah. But I highly recommend it, and I hope that people do get to visit his home, especially, and the church where he was baptized, and there was a whole history there of Gogol and his Ukrainian world.
Yeah, we had spoken on the phone a little bit about his relationship or his acquaintance with Shevchenko, because there are different kind of accounts of that period. What do you know?
Well, it seems to me, for some reason, okay, I'm not sure figuring this out. There are no witnesses or any writings about, or anybody who said anything that Shevchenko and Gogol ever met. They were contemporaries, certainly. And Shevchenko even wrote a poem dedicated to Gogol. I don't know if you know this, but he did. And Gogol was admired by Shevchenko, certainly. They never met, but their lives didn't really quite intersect either, because for many years, while Shevchenko was in exile, Gogol was in Rome. He had a whole different lifestyle, And I think my take is that I think he admired Shevchenko, but he was also afraid to be his champion in the way that others were not. And I think that was something that tore at him, because I really suspect that Gogol was also afraid of being arrested, especially after his play, The Inspector General, where he criticized all the aristocrats. So I have a feeling that because writers like Shevchenko were being arrested, and so was, oh my gosh, I can't think of his name, but there were other writers constantly being abused and arrested and sent into exile. Shevchenko being truly punished more than others. This was a warning sign, and I think he wanted maybe to be an advocate, but was afraid for his own life, and probably wasn't as brave as he should have been. I also think there was sort of a competition. I think that he, people admired Shevchenko and what a great singer he was. This is one of the things that I found out also, that Shevchenko had a great voice. People used to say, yeah, his paintings were okay, his poetry, yeah, it's okay. His voice was magnificent, the singing voice. I never knew that before. And Gogol used to collect folk music, Ukrainian folk music, and would give a lot of what he found to Maximovich, who collected it in a very famous book. And it wasn't for Gogol's finding a lot of this old music that he knew, because he had peasants on his estate, serfs, so he knew all these songs. But there was some sort of competition between, I think, some kind of jealousy maybe between Gogol of Shevchenko. Not so much Shevchenko of Gogol, but I think Gogol had a little bit of an antagonism towards him. Something I'm still exploring. In my book, but I was going to say, in my book, they do meet. And one time their lives do intersect. Maybe they did meet. But I'm thinking, this is the great thing about fiction, I can make this up. So when Gogol first came to St. Petersburg, he had to get a job, and he worked at one of the ministry offices, which is where that great story, The Overcoat, comes from. But anyway, but after work, he would go off to the Royal Academy of Art, and he would take drawing lessons, which is at the same time that Shevchenko did. So, it's possible, because Gogol was always interested in meeting other Ukrainians, and so it's very, very likely they met somehow. And in my book, they do meet. You have to, I hope you get to read it sometime.
I'd like to have you back to present it in person.
Yeah, in person. Yes, me too. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I would love that.
This coming Tuesday, Irene, PEN America and PEN Ukraine will hold an online literary event of fiction and poetry readings entitled The Countries Between Us. Ukrainian and Ukrainian American writers share poetry, fiction, and cultural perspectives. You yourself will be participating alongside some of your peers, among them Vasil Mokhno, Askud Melnichuk, Alexander Motig, Oksana Lutsishina, and Zvinka Orlovsky. Can you give us a little sneak peek of that, and what people can expect, or what the public can expect, and what the premise is?
Yeah, well, I have to say, I'm proud to say this is my idea, and this was something I approached PEN America with first, because I'm a member. And I wanted to do something, especially during the pandemic. We're not networking, we're not seeing people. It would be so great to hook up with writers from Ukraine and writers here. I mean, Ukrainian Americans, because as you were mentioning before, there aren't too many of us. And maybe if we were more visible, maybe we'd give others the idea or the courage to start writing and becoming one of us as well, and also to network with one another and with the world and going beyond the Ukrainian community. So PEN America hooked me up with PEN Ukraine. And after several emails and back and forths, we finally got it together. And so we've invited these people to participate, 6 writers. It was hard to whittle down the amount of people. We wanted more to participate, of course, but time constraints, that was a limitation. Maybe we'll do more later. But basically what we're going to talk about, we're going to read from our works and how Ukraine in particular, our ancestral links to Ukraine, matter in the things we write. Why does it come out in the way it does? What are we writing about these days? It's very interesting. We're all such different people, although we have a Ukrainian heritage link and connection. But we're writing about different things as well. I mean, we're a very disparate group with different issues, and I think this is very important. So this is an absolute fabulous opportunity to get to know and to be acquainted with what we're doing, and maybe encourage other people to do the same.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It's a fabulous idea. I'm looking forward to attending myself.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think that'll end it. But what I'd like to do is open up to some questions now from our audience. So I hope you'll be able to entertain some of those thoughts. Our very good friend Lydia writes, as an artist myself, I jumped to the last story in your new collection about an artist and artist friends. I love the magical realism, the power of creativity as a life force that regenerates, sustains, and heals. And the artist's passionate painting of birch trees is a wonderful metaphor for the miraculous and wonderful in life. Thank you for evoking the positive energy that you, all artists, share and experience. Now she has a follow-up to that. Will you be using the Ukrainian hohol or the Russian gogol in your upcoming writing? As a Ukrainian American like you, I would hope that you reclaim his actual Ukrainian name and a transliteration to hohol.
Mm-hmm. This is always a problem. This is a problem I had with the Sky Unwashed. Do I say Chernobyl or Chornobyl?
Right.
This is an issue with. It's an issue with translation. It's an issue with how my characters are talking. So when my characters are speaking in Russian, although I'm not writing in Russian or Ukrainian, I'm writing in English.
In English.
But when they are writing in Russian, when they're speaking to one another in Russian, then it will be gogol. When they're speaking to each other in Ukrainian, it will be hohol. And that's a designation that I decided makes the most sense. Although I am writing, in English. In fact, I'll read this to you at the opening to the Sky Unwashed. Where is it? I just happen to have this. Okay, author's note, Sky Unwashed. When an author writes in one alphabet and her characters speak in another, the problem of transliteration arises. Because the characters in this book speak in Ukrainian and at times in Russian, I have used the English transliterations from both these languages, Kiev and Kiev, Chornobyl and Chernobyl, etc. And this is what I intend to do for Gogol Hohoi. And that just is in keeping with who they are as the characters.
Titania,
it's a great question. Thank you.
It is indeed. Titania has a comment and a question. Dear Irene, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I have tons of questions to you, but we'll put just two. So here are the two questions. When the pandemic is over, which places are on your travel list? Number two, when you wrote this new collection of short stories, did you aim it for an American audience or Ukrainian? What is your role? What is your model reader, that is? In other words, who is your ideal audience?
Oh, yeah. With the pandemic, I'm going to New York for sure. I need my New York fix. Love New York. I love Chicago. Hopefully, I'll be doing a presentation in Chicago later this year. And that's my roots. That's where I'm from originally. I'm always a Chicagoan.
Sure.
Love to go back. So, yes. And then Ukraine. I need to go back to Ukraine. I've left many things behind, including a laptop. I'm sorry I didn't. I'll be back. Yeah, sure. I have a lot of things, and I do want to revisit some of the places I missed for the Gogol book previously, because my foot situation. And other places, I may go back to Rome again. I don't know. I'll see. But certainly Europe and certainly Ukraine in particular, and New York. That's my next stop, New York. And the second question had to do with what? I'm sorry.
Audience.
I blanked out.
What's your ideal audience?
Oh, my audience.
Is it
you
for
are my
Americans,
yeah,
or Americans or Ukrainians?
Yeah, both. I have no. I'm not prejudiced against one or the other. I would love to read. I would like everybody to read. I read many ethnic writers. I'm enamored. I want to know their worlds. The thing about writing is to make it universal. We're all humans. To make the condition human. The stories human. I can read about anybody in any part of the world, but will it touch me on some emotional human level? That's the thing, and that's what I try to portray in my stories. My ideal reader is anybody who reads literature and literary works. I'm not a romance writer. I'm not a sci-fi writer. I'm not a genre writer. So if you're reading literary fiction, you know what I'm talking about then. And that's who I write for.
Anna asks, and this is appropriate to the PEN conference. Can you give us further information on how to sign up for the PEN America PEN Ukraine event?
Yeah.
Is there a website or?
Yeah.
specifically, if you can share that, that would be great.
Yeah, if you go to Pen Ukraine, and I don't have the link, unfortunately. I don't know if we can link it down there.
I think the best thing to do, and I did this myself, is to Google the Pen Ukraine and the title of the conference, and it'll go directly there. So I think it's probably a great place to start.
Yeah, and it is Facebook. It's a Facebook thing, so you can search Facebook Pen Ukraine as well, and also Pen America should have something about that as well. But Pen Ukraine would be the best.
We have a question from our good friend Ilona. I have to give a shout out. Ilona is an artist and also the founder of our reading group. So she was very, I'm very happy that she attended today. She asks, I am curious about your comment on Nabokov. I did not know he didn't like Ukrainians. Why? And how do you know this?
Yeah. Well, intuitive. I can just tell. Intuitive. He always makes fun about Ukrainians who are Catholic, Greek Catholics. There are a few snide remarks he makes in some of his essays. Also, Gogol. He wrote a great book about Gogol. It's a very slim volume. It's one of the best books written about Gogol. However, he said that Gogol would not have been who he is as a writer if he just kept to writing about Ukrainians. So, and it was, again, that snide, sarcastic, contemptuous way Nabokov has in how he writes about people and things, which I love on some level, but not about Gogol and not about Ukrainians. So my interpretation is that, yeah, I don't think he was very fond of Ukrainians. That's okay. Again, that's fine.
Vida asks, who are the poets and authors you admire in Ukraine? Coming out of Ukraine.
Coming out of Ukraine. You mean contemporary?
Contemporary.
Contemporary. Oksana Zabushko is one of the best around. I mean, you can't beat her. And her essays are superb in particular. There are many poets. I don't know many offhand. And many have to be in translation for me. What I am more enamored by, actually, are the writers of the revolution. You know, Khwilovi. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Khwilovi, in particular.
Khwilovi.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's who. And again, I'm reading these in translation. And many from that era. There's another writer, and I can't think of his name, but he wrote something about coming to Kiev in the 1930s. This is a fictional work. I wish I can remember his name. He wrote a very big novel about it, and just the kind, and his love affairs, and finding an apartment, and this whole idea of being a proletarian, and all of that stuff, which, you know, is nonsensical on some level, but yet it really encapsulates the time and the mindset of the people. And even the optimism of the time, which, of course, it was extinguished very quickly later. But for those few years, I just find that fascinating. It was very experimental, which is one of the reasons why I wrote about Les Kurubas in one of my other stories. You know, that was a great time. Oh my God, it was amazing. The 20s, the 30s, and especially in Ukraine. And maybe I'll do more with that later someday. But for me, that's I would like to know more about that period and the writers and artists of that time, which was explosive in creativity.
I don't recall the exact title. Viryana Tkach had edited a collection of essays to which she contributed as well about that entire time period in the 20s and 30s in and around Kiev. I think it was called Kiev Modernism or Modernism in Kiev, something of that sort. So it's flush with great resource material for you to look at.
It is. So, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, decidedly, our program has to come to an end. You know, it's a time constraint. Thank you ever so much, Irene, for sharing your time with us today and for your enduring contributions to contemporary literature. In the future, we look forward to hosting you in person, hopefully with the publication of your new book. Please keep us abreast of that. And I wish you best wishes for continued success. And special thanks to all of you at home for taking the time to attend today's presentation. It's because of you, your interest, support, and participation that these events are possible here. I hope each of you found a nugget of inspiration for further thought and reading. And I urge you to seek out Miss Zabytko's books, whether you have an affinity for short stories or novels, or for their astute commentary on culture and society. For information about the Ukrainian Institute of America, our current and upcoming programming, please visit us at ukrainianinstitute.org. We hope to see you soon. Irene, thank you again so much. It was such a thrill.
Thank you so much, Andrei. Thank you to the Institute. Thank you to everybody who's there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope to see you on Tuesday and again in person sometime.